resources, and is now taking an active role in how the military construction is going to influence the territory and its people. So please join me in welcoming Senator Pangelinan.
Thank you, and Sidusmasi, Mike, and I want to express my appreciation to the publishers of the book Bomb Buyer for inviting me to join you this morning. It's indeed my pleasure and honor. To get to here, I think I had to cross maybe 8 or 9 time zones. So if anybody wants some hot tips for the stock market tomorrow, see me today, because it's already tomorrow in Guam. I hope my voice also lasts me. I think I also crossed 4 vocal cords zones to get here. Buenas and hafade, manana sidus para hamzus todos. In Chamorro, our native language on Guam, that means good morning and hello. We're an oral people, so it took us 20 words to say those 2 things. We have sometimes been referred to as Guam, where America's day begins, Guam, the hub of the Pacific. For those of you who are not clear where Guam is, it's about 7,921 miles from Washington, D.C., and about 3,820 miles west of Hawaii. To put it into better perspective, it takes about 20 hours of flying time while passing the international dateline to get here from Guam. It's not a big island, only 8 miles wide and 30 miles long, with land area of about 214 square miles. And despite our small size, we are the largest island in our part of the world, the Marianas Island chains, and so we think we're the center of the earth. We have a population of around 160,000, which is about 8% comprised of military personnel on Guam. Guam is home to a 4,000-year-old seafaring indigenous population of Chamorros. In the 21st century, Guam is more a true melting pot. Our residents come from the multitude of ethnic backgrounds: Filipinos, Palauans, Marshallese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese, and a mix of people coming from all over the United States who have made Guam their home. And dozens of languages are spoken in our island. Religious practices, traditions, customs, culture, and histories all differ tremendously. So beyond a tremendous distance in the Pacific, there's also a wide spectrum of cultural variation. Guam's economy is driven by a vibrant tourism industry. Over 1 million tourists, mainly from Japan and Korea, visit Guam yearly, and the non-tourism private sector is much similar to what you would see in your communities: general stores, restaurants, retail shopping, driven by a mixture of medium and small businesses. The government of Guam, federal government, and military contribute to the employment and economic activity on the island. Guam has a unique history that is included being claimed for Spain by Ferdinand Magellan when he got lost in the Pacific, history that has been also part of a Japanese occupation directly after World War II and the attack on Pearl Harbor. Guam was attacked at the same time Pearl Harbor was attacked, and Guam was occupied for 3 years by the Japanese Imperial Army after that. Guam's relationship with the U.S. is complex. Although we are U.S. citizens and we may enjoy many of the rights afforded to those living in the U.S., we cannot vote for president, and our delegate to Congress does not have a vote on the legislative and congressional floor. Guam is an organized, unincorporated territory, and in 1950, the Organic Act of Guam was passed, which provided for a civilian local government. We are a unicameral legislature with an elected governor and an elected legislature with 15 senators, of which I am one of them. According to the final environmental impact statement, which has come to be known as the Guam Realignment, the Military Buildup, or the Guam Relocation, from Okinawa to Guam, Okinawa, Japan to Guam, it contained the overarching purpose and the need for such a large move of military forces, which is to meet the international agreement and treaty requirements and to fulfill U.S. national treaty policy requirements for the mutual defense, to defer aggression, to dissuade coercion in the Western Pacific. These international agreements and treaty requirements involve countries such as the Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, Korea, France, Thailand, as well as Japan. Most notable is the 1960 Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security between the United States and Japan, which is considered the most relevant treaty to the buildup, which provides that both countries maintain capabilities to resist armed attack and mutually assist each other in defense against any armed attack on the territories under the Japanese administration. This treaty also provides that Japan to consult prior to any major relocation of U.S. forces in Japan. It was about 3 years ago in February of 2009 when the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton visited Japan and reaffirmed the agreement between Japan and the United States of the relocation of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force personnel and their dependents from Okinawa to Guam, signed by both Secretary Clinton and Japan Foreign Minister. The initial time frame for the buildup was provided in the draft Environmental Impact Statement required under, of course, the National Environmental Protection Policy, otherwise known as NEPA, and saw the buildup completion targeted for 2014, a mere 2 years from today. Today, we find that the buildup is somewhat at a standstill with major budget constraints on both the governments of the U.S. and Japan, which greatly affects its progress to date. Notwithstanding these issues, Guam continues to plan and prepare for what has been considered the inevitable buildup of the Marine forces on the island, yet with no truly confirmed time frame and time set. The buildup has spurred increased economic interest, and the activity on the island since the announcement almost a decade ago. Back then and throughout the evolution into what it is today, the buildup has continued to drive much of the governmental and private sector finance, economic, and societal planning, simply because the estimated population increase would have greatly affected the people of Guam's environmental and societal norms. With the economic boom that was and continues to be expected, the government and business of Guam continues to prepare for the buildup, albeit to a lesser extent, such that there has been much uncertainty placed on such plans because of the budget-conscious mood in Congress today. In November of 2009, the people of Guam were stunned to hear of a news that a 10,000-page draft environmental impact statement was released for public review, and we were given only 90 days to submit comments. Abandoning and overcoming all discouragement from the unreasonable time frame allowed, our local environmental experts, social workers, health professionals, cultural preservationists, scholars did their homework, and many of us concluded that according to the DIIS, Guam would be faced with far more challenges than benefits with respect to the buildup and marine relocation. There were concerns about the increased strain on our natural resources and the scarcity of land from which our civilian population was already burdened. Among all the other issues addressed, the one most pronounced was the great possibility that more land would be acquired by the Department of Defense beyond its existing military footprint. With that said, DIS revealed that a very culturally sensitive and sacred parcel of land to the Chamorros was the most preferred alternative as a potential spot for live firing training range. This, according to many people, was not an option to be considered by anyone. The area is known as Pagat, a piece of land rich in historical significance to our people, for more reasons than one. If I were to compare the sacredness of this area to something you would be more familiar with, imagine a firing range placed on the grounds of Arlington National Cemetery. After the record of decision was signed, there were news that the Department of Defense would soon be taken to court for violating NEPA. The groups who filed the suit claimed that while there were several alternatives presented in the EIS, other alternatives had yet to be identified or explored. Through the course of the lawsuit, however, the Department of the Navy and the Department of Defense decided that additional studies had to be conducted for a supplemental EIS to be produced. The lawsuit has since then been dismissed, and the scoping meetings for the people of Guam to discuss possible alternatives to the location of the firing range have begun. Other changes that are scheduled to take place, and instead of the initial influx of approximately 8,600 active duty personnel and their dependents who are expected to arrive on Guam as a result of the relocation, it has been announced that the number has been reduced to around 5,000. All throughout this process, my colleagues in the Guam legislature and I have maintained a firm position that the people of Guam, the people we serve, must not be left behind in the decisions. If at any time there are adverse effects to these decisions, it is my duty as a policymaker to stop, look, listen, and then proceed with caution. I have attended meetings to discuss to continue to maintain such a position because of our natural resources are very limited on Guam. It is important that we make our that we seek other viable avenues that must meet the demands of the Department of Defense, both in the ways that we do not adversely alter the lives of our people. In the technical report for the supplemental EIS, it was reported that most of the alternative firing range sites posed have been dismissed because of the fact that the military have existing residential, commercial, and recreational structures. By the same token, this is exactly the same concern we have if other land is sought outside the fence among civilian, residential, commercial, and residential structures. While Pagat had yet to be removed from the list of possible alternatives to a firing range, the Department of Defense added other alternatives, which includes land that is considered to be just as valuable to the Chamorro people as Pagat, but this is land that is partially located on land that is already owned by the Department of the Navy. There are many concerns we have about our island's environment, public health, and social services, among other things, but the business community argues that the marine relocation will spur economic activity unlike in our island's history. The economic opportunities may exist, but we have yet to see a plan or a solution for adequately mitigating all of the issues that will take place concurrently. That is why the Guam legislature has remained firm in its commitment to making sure that all alternatives have been presented before decisions are brought to fruition. There are many new developments in the DoD's decision to resubmit the EIS. I believe it is our opportunity to take a closer look at the military housing privatization initiative as part of this process. As I mentioned earlier, Guam is approximately 30 miles long and 9 miles wide, or about 135,679 acres. And until recently, ownership of this was divided approximately in thirds, 1/3 to the civilian government, 1/3 to the federal government, and 1/3 to private landowners. Andersen Air Force Base is the largest military installation that blankets over 15,000 acres on the northern part of the island. The next largest installation is the Naval Munition Sites towards the southern end of the island, covering over 8,600 acres. Near the magazine is the Naval Base Guam, which covers over 3,500 acres. Andersen and the Naval Base all contain military housing, and there are 5 military installations between the two, among the other parts of the island. According to the Department of Defense, Andersen Air Force Base have 1,390 existing units, housing units, on base, inclusive of the bachelor dormitory quarters and active family housing units. The Navy has 1,400 active family housing units and over 1,000 bachelor quarter spaces. That is a total of 4,000 housing units on the existing bases in Guam. The Record of Decision, the public document containing the formal decision to establish the Marine Corps operations on Guam, initially proposed to relocate 8,600 Marines and their 9,000 dependents from Okinawa to Guam. The additional housing requirement to accommodate the transferring Marines and their families were estimated to add 3,520 housing units and dozens of quality of life improvement facilities to support the planned neighborhoods. On May 1st, 2006, the United States-Japan Roadmap for Realignment Implementation outlined a bilateral agreement where the government of Japan agreed to contribute $2.8 billion in direct cash contributions and $3.29 billion in the form of equities and loans to what they termed special purpose entities. And the U.S. agreed to contribute $4.18 billion towards the cost of the relocation. In the 2006 agreement, $2.55 billion of the equity and loans to these special purpose entities were earmarked for the construction of the estimated 3,520 units, housing units. As of 2010, the Navy's Joint Program Office disclosed that the government of Japan's loans to the SPE would occur as a public-private venture, or a PPV. The Joint Program Office described the PPP arrangement as, quote, the Department of the Navy's goal for the Guam Housing PPV is to design and construct a housing community consistent with other U.S. military housing private initiative projects and recent Department of Defense Navy housing construction projects on Guam. So it's clear that what they were doing under the SP special purpose entities with the government of Japan would mirror the current privatization initiatives under the Mhpi. Exactly which special purpose entities would design, build, and manage the housing was never publicly disclosed because the SPE arrangement required further negotiated agreements between the U.S. and Japan should the model and structure and roles of responsibilities for each of the government. The Guam Realignment Agreement PPP venture concept clearly to me is the military housing private initiative concept, and the primary difference being that Japan was financing the projects and more than likely would have Japanese companies receive the contracts to design, build, and manage the construction of the housing units. Most importantly, the U.S. Government Accountability Office points out that in one of the many reports on the Guam realignment, that the May 2006 Roadmap Agreement included the expectation that the $2.55 billion of financing from the government of Japan to be recouped over time in the form of service charges paid by the United States, in rents paid by the Marine Corps service personnel using DoD-provided overseas housing allowance. On April 26, 2012, the U.S.-Japan Security Consultative Committee issued a joint statement that outlined changes to the May 2006 roadmap to realignment, including cancellation of Japan's $3.29 billion of equity and loans to the SPEs. While some view these changes as a blow to the Guam realignment, I believe it presents a tremendous opportunity for, one, the Department of Defense to work towards a master plan that embraces President Obama's One Guam vision as the U.S. military and our island move towards a long-term strategic partnership in defending our nation as well as our allies in the Asia-Pacific region, and two, to engage all of you to lead the way in developing a new housing required for the marine relocation from Okinawa to Guam, as well as to convert many of the existing 4,000 housing units on military bases to MHPI arrangements in order to allow the land to be repurposed for military operations. The original Guam realignment plan settled on a preferred alternative to place all new housing in the northern part of Guam on existing base and partially on 600 acres of private property that would need to be acquired by the Department of Defense. This model can coexist with the MHPI program since we have already established that the earlier proposed PP, public-private venture, is basically MHPI. But is this contiguous base approach the best alternative for our stakeholders in the newly but yet to be completely determined marine relocation to Guam? thus creating a new city of over 3,500 housing units and supporting ancillary facilities behind military fences and installations best serve the people of Guam, the servicemen, and the Department of Defense. I believe this concept can be tweaked. The move to reposition the Marines is a key component of a much larger global security that effectively could remain in place for decades. The decision are made today is how the Marines are relocated to Guam will shape our future relationship between the federal government, the military, and the people of Guam. What we don't need is for all this relationship to evolve into what we are seeing in Okinawa today, where there is a desire of the people to liberate their homelands from the Marines. How often can this be accomplished? It can be accomplished. How else can this be accomplished? It can be accomplished by integrating military housing throughout the island. Rather than build a city behind the fence of the base, the new Marine Relocation Master Plan should effectively integrate military communities within our communities. Rather than shield the servicemen and women and their families and give them the option of living in subdivisions throughout different parts of the islands, for example. For example, some people enjoy the serenity and the beauty of our southern part of the island, which includes scenic car rides into more densely populated areas in the north. Others might prefer to live in subdivisions that are minutes away from Tumon Bay, the crown jewel of our visitor industry, where they can spend time in the beach swimming, windsurfing, or paddling an outrigger canoe. There will be families that prefer to live in a subdivision like Manilao, central to the part of the island close to the University of Guam and the Guam Community College. The current housing inventory for the Navy includes several different locations highlighting that non-contiguous housing to the main base operations is not a new concept in Guam and works well. Some of these housing locations are recently constructed and renovated, so it may not be practicable to build new housing for these communities and repurpose the land. However, there is housing near the Naval Magazine that can be repurposed and allow controversial firing range to be completely contained within the existing base footprint without requiring the acquisition of any more land and without further financial impositions. The initial target to complete the realignment was 2014, but our friends in Congress have plans of their own and have made them very clear to us that with the recent deficit reduction plans, the Super Committee's failure to provide an agreed-upon plan last November may lead to reduction in defense programs between 8 to 10% between 2013 and 2021. The goal, according to a report from the Congressional Budget Office, is to cut $492 billion from defense budgetary resources. That's about $55 billion a year. These reductions will be felt from the decrease in activity from MILCON projects, both related and not related to the military relocation. If austerity wasn't enough, the projects related to the Guam realignment have already come to a standstill because of the 2012 NDAA restricts the use of funds to implement Department of Defense revised base realignment until 1, the Commandant of the Marine Corps of the United States Pacific Command provides Congress the preferred laydown for the United States Pacific Command area of responsibility. Number 2, the Secretary of Defense submit master plans for construction of facilities and infrastructure to execute the preferred laydown, including descriptions of cost and schedules. 3, the Department of Defense certifies that tangible progress regarding the relocation of the Marine Corps base at Futenma in Okinawa. And 4, a plan coordinated by all federal agencies submitted detailing work, costs, and schedule of completing construction, improvements, and repairs to non-military facilities, infrastructure on Guam affected by the alignment of the force. It is clear that the Congress, primarily led by the Senate Armed Services Committee, is unwilling to authorize funding for the Marine relocation until the Department of Defense has a tangible laydown plan, including cost estimates. Other provisions of the FY 2012 NDAA require further action, including a reevaluation of live firing training range complex alternatives. At this time, the latest draft of the National Defense Authorization Act rests with the Senate. However, Senate Armed Services Committee markup contains similar provisions restricting the use of the appropriation and Japan's current direct cash contributions under a master plan and other unless a master plan and other milestones are reached. With this current budget-conscious mood in Congress and the need to reduce spending throughout the federal government, the MPHI appears to be a partial yet viable solution to the cost-impact issues that have stalled the Department of Defense in its military personnel relocation efforts in the Asia-Pacific region, specifically in regards to the land requirements in an island that has an underabundance of land. The importance of understanding the needs of all parties involved in the military relocation is predicated by the notion that all parties must win in order for a successful relocation to take place. The legislative authority granted under MHPI takes into consideration this budget-conscious mood such that new appropriations may not be necessary for additional housing that will be needed for military personnel that will be stationed on Guam, but rather existing appropriations from the basic allowance for housing that military personnel are provided, which is provided at a higher rate in Guam as an overseas station than it is provided for the continental U.S. This reduced need for upfront funding from the United States should provide the winning incentive for this plan to come to fruition, especially in the eyes of Congress. With a more viable and financially conservative option to fulfill military housing requirements for the buildup, the Department of Defense must consider this in its upcoming master plan that is being prepared for Congress in the requirements on the NDAA Act of 2012, which will further drive the upfront cost of the building that can potentially persuade Congress to act positively to the continuation of the buildup and a win for DOD. As I mentioned before, Guam only enjoys approximately 214 square miles of land area, of which DOD controls a little less than 1/3 of most of these seized from private landowners for military purposes in the aftermath of World War II. Additional land requirements for the buildup, specifically for its live firing range, have initiated negative sentiments and reactions to the buildup amongst the people of Guam. A properly designed MHPI solution can decrease any additional land requirements for the housing of additional military personnel through the use of private capital financing to construct military housing near and around current military bases on Guam on privately owned land. With less land on the current military bases, this leaves room for military to use its current land holdings for other projects, such as the required firing range, which has nevertheless been an extremely contentious issue for the residents of Guam. Contentious may be an understatement, as the previous plan saw that nationally registered historic places was to be placed in and around the proposed firing range complex. With less land needed to be acquired by DOD for military housing needs, it opens up more land within its current inventory for projects such as the firing range complex and provides a win for the concerned residents of Guam. Guam, the federal government, and the Department of Defense have a rare opportunity to create a win-win-win scenario when relocating Marines from Okinawa to Guam. The entire process over the last 6 years has evolved from a huge, seemingly impossible undertaking that included inflated, unrealistic plans that were eventually deemed unworkable by high-ranking members of Congress and eventually both the United States and Japan governments. Residents in both Okinawa and Guam engaged the governments through legal and political process in order to ensure that their voices did not fall on deaf ears and that their land, natural resources, and cultures are protected from unnecessary and harmful development at the expense of the current and future generations of the islanders. The federal government and the military share a long history with Guam that includes colonization and militarization. It also includes the liberation of the island from World War II Japanese occupation, for which many of the people of Guam have been grateful. Though many on Guam will not be satisfied until our political status is resolved, the reality is that we are an unincorporated territory of the United States, bound by the laws enacted by the United States Congress and the policies of the United States President or the military's commander-in-chief. Because Guam has been identified by the U.S. as a critical location to stage military operations in the Pacific, it is imperative that our island and its people view the pending action by the Department of Defense as a mutually beneficial arrangement that minimizes any negative impact to the land, environment, and the culture. The Military Housing Privatization Initiative can help individual landowners and businesses on Guam by allowing them to partner with developers and bankers to develop military housing throughout the island. Building these subdivisions throughout the island will integrate military families with our local population. It will generate commerce for small and large businesses in the development areas, and new businesses will open to meet the needs of the additional residents. The inventory of rental units available to local residents will increase, and the cost to rent should come more in line with affordable Guam households. The government of Guam will benefit from additional tax revenues generated by Mhpi developments and the additional activity throughout the island. The controversial drilling of over 30 new water wells on military property will not be necessary. The government-owned water utility can service the military population from the same system that provides our local people. Similarly, the additional investment by the government-owned power utility will benefit all the people on Guam and not just the new city proposed behind the Sentry Gate at the Naval Communications Base operations in the original plan. In some cases, this approach may not score high on OMB budget sheets because some of the existing on-base housing has yet to see its return of investment. This is where the United States must rise to the occasion and use some diplomacy within its own citizens. It must be willing to take a loss for the greater good of the people of Guam, the land, the government, and the matters of historical and cultural significance. They must be willing to show some statesmanship and be able to say, we hear you, we understand these things are important to you, and we are willing to compromise to make concessions. The military housing privatization initiatives can be the catalyst to create a big win for the military on Guam. Integrating military housing in the community sends a message to all the people of Guam that we are willing to make this concession to protect what is important and sacred to you. Additionally, it removes an arrogant and troublesome position that the military has embraced in the final environmental impact statement, that putting firing ranges on existing bases is not an option because it is inconvenient for servicemen and women stationed on Guam, and it would potentially require relocating munition sites. A petition that said our preferred alternative is to attain over 1,000 acres of historically and culturally significant and unique land where thousands of Guam residents enjoy activities for a firing range. A position that said loud and clear, the people of Guam do not matter if it means our servicemen and women must be inconvenienced, and we have to relocate where we store our bombs and our bullets. A new master plan for the marine relocation that incorporates these ideas can win the hearts and minds of our community and help achieve the goals of the military in their global repositioning strategy. The military can also use this approach to allay any lingering questions about their ability to gain local support for their plans, and once again, for all clear the hurdles the United States Senate to release funding to move forward. Guam military bases are already highly regarded by our servicemen and women. Building new housing subdivisions throughout the island and providing a portfolio of choices to servicemen and women and their families will make Guam assignments that much more attractive. Guam is the United States, and just like Hawaii military housing privatization initiatives, it can be flourished and just as successful. The last group of winners in using the military privatization initiative for Guam is the federal government and the U.S. taxpayers. The private sector will put your pencils to paper and figure out what is the optimal cost to meet the housing needs of the military on Guam. The result will be better housing at a lower cost than what is appropriated to the military today. The Congress will benefit where we will not require significant appropriations to get the housing built, and once built, the existing appropriations for overseas housing allowance and the existing maintenance contracts for base housing can be used for the new housing. In fact, it is likely that the required appropriations will be less or remain flat at today's level. What is not to like about all this? At a time when the federal deficit is driving policy decisions made here on the Hill, the military housing privatization initiatives can be used as a tool to address the concerns of Congress. On that note, it is important to emphasize that the U.S. Senate is in the driver's seat as to how and when the Marine relocation occurs. It is imperative that all of you use your political influence to rally for a new master plan for the Marine location that includes military housing initiatives for the base on Guam, but also to replace the existing military housing. Convince policymakers to require inclusion of MHPI in the master plan as a condition of releasing any funding for the relocation activity. The 2012 U.S.-Japan Security Consultative Committee announced of changes to the initial Guam realignment has opened the door for many opportunities. Guam, the federal government, and the military shares the opportunity to work cooperatively towards a Marine relocation master plan that works for all parties involved. Bankers, venture capitalists, and developers have the opportunity to push the Obama administration, the Congress, and DOD to completely privatize all military housing on Guam. This is an opportunity of a lifetime that can have a positive effect on hundreds of thousands of servicemen and women and their families and the people of Guam for decades to come. Thank you. Para todos y atención mismo. Thank you very much for your attention, please.
We have time for one question. I think you've covered the landscape.
Thank you very much, Sidus Masi.
Thanks very much, Senator. That does bring us to our first networking break. It's sponsored by Standard & Poor's. Also want to thank Moody's Investor Service for sponsoring breakfast this morning. The coffee has been refreshed, so please take about a half hour. We'll reconvene here at 11 o'clock with our roundtable to talk about MHPI 2.0. One other logistical note, for those of you who were unable to get notebooks when you checked in this morning, we apologize for that. You've already received in your emails the attendee list, so that's already been sent to you, and all of the presentations will be emailed to the entire audience in about 48 hours. So watch your emails for all the materials. Thanks.